Daniel had driven this road countless times before, but that evening, every turn, every traffic light, every flicker of the dashboard felt strange, as if the world around him had shifted slightly while he wasn't looking. The sky above bled shades of orange and gray. The sun setting quietly behind the buildings and trees lining the familiar streets. Normally, he would hum along with the soft music playing in the car, letting the rhythm of his favorite songs guide him home after a long day, but today the melodies sounded hollow, echoing strangely against the tension building in his chest. His phone lay beside him, dark and silent, yet its presence seemed louder than the engine itself. A subtle vibration, almost imperceptible at first, made him glance at it. A message had appeared, a brief line flashing on the screen for only a second. He didn't recognize the name, and that small unfamiliarity hit him like a cold wave. He knew instinctively that it wasn't meant for him. He tried to shake the feeling off, telling himself it could be a mistake. A work message misdirected, a friend texting the wrong number, but his heart raced in a way that told him otherwise. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles whitening as he forced himself to focus on the road to ignore the uneasy sensation creeping through his stomach. Every car around him seemed to move faster, every horn sounded sharper, every passing shadow on the street felt like a whisper of warning. Daniel thought about Laura, his wife, smiling at him that morning as she left for work, the warmth of her hand on his arm, the light in her eyes. They had built a life together, shared routines, and made countless memories, or at least he thought they had. And yet, in that single moment, everything felt fragile, as if all the laughter, all the love, could be disrupted with one simple truth. His mind raced through possibilities, trying to rationalize, trying to convince himself that nothing was wrong, but the nagging uncertainty refused to be ignored. He slowed down as he approached a familiar intersection, his eyes flicking between the road and the shadowed sidewalk, half expecting to see something he didn't want to see. His thoughts started uncontrollably, jumping from the simplest explanations to the worst-case scenarios. He imagined arguments he hadn't had yet, tears he hadn't shed, nights filled with silence that neither of them would want. The rhythm of the world outside seemed to quicken, the trees whipping past his car windows, the streetlights flickering like warning signs he couldn't quite read. Daniel thought of the small things that had seemed insignificant until now. The delayed replies to his messages, the brief moments of distraction, the slight hesitation in her tone when she spoke about her day. Nothing had screamed danger, but tonight it all clicked together in a silent, undeniable warning. The music shifted, a slow song playing that had always reminded him of happy times, of summer evenings walking hand in hand with Laura. But now every lyric felt twisted, every note a reminder of how uncertain things could be. The message on his phone flickered in his memory again, brief and harmless at first glance, yet it carried a weight he could not dismiss. He imagined Laura sitting somewhere, unaware of the storm brewing in his mind, going about her evening while his thoughts spun faster and faster, pulling him into a whirlpool of doubt. He told himself he was overthinking, that his imagination was running wild. But a part of him, the smallest, quietest part, knew that this feeling was different. It was not just anxiety. It was recognition, a gut instinct warning him that life, as he knew it, might be on the brink of change. He shifted in his seat, trying to breathe steadily, but each exhale felt heavy, laden with questions he couldn't answer yet. His eyes scanned the road, noting the familiar landmarks, the street corners, the distant glow of windows in apartment buildings. Everything was normal, yet the normality itself felt eerie, almost fragile. The street ahead stretched straight and endless, and with each passing mile, Daniel felt the weight of the day pressing harder against his chest. He recalled small memories from the morning. Laura's laugh as she spilled coffee on the counter, her playful teasing about his messy desk, the way she had kissed his cheek before leaving. He had clung to those moments for comfort, but now they seemed tainted by doubt, as if they were fragments of a past life he had not realized was slipping away. A car honked behind him, pulling him sharply back to the present. Daniel hit the accelerator without thinking, eager to put distance between himself and the sudden tension that had gripped him. The city lights blurred as he drove faster, but his mind raced faster still. He imagined confronting Laura, asking her the question that had begun to form on the tip of his tongue. The question that terrified him even as it demanded an answer. Is something happening that I don't know about? He pictured her eyes, the mixture of guilt and sorrow that might flash across her face, the silence that could fill the space between them like a growing chasm. The thought made his stomach twist, but he could not stop. He had to know, even if. The truth hurts. The radio clicked from one station to another, static, filling the pauses between songs. And Daniel realized he hadn't noticed the time passing. The sun had dipped lower and the world outside his car had begun to darken. Shadows stretching longer, wrapping the streets in quiet uncertainty. He wondered if Laura would notice anything different when he got home, if she could sense the change. In him, if she knew that everything might feel different from this moment forward. His hands tightened on the wheel again, the leather rough against his skin, grounding him in the present even as his thoughts tore him apart. The message on his phone flickered in memory again, brief and seemingly insignificant, yet it had started. Something irreversible. Every mile he drove felt like a countdown to an invisible event. Every turn bringing him closer to a confrontation he was both dreading and needing. The familiar landmarks of his neighborhood began to appear. Houses with lights glowing softly in the dusk, children playing in yards, neighbors walking dogs. Normally, these sights brought him a sense of home, comfort, belonging. But tonight, they only heightened the unease inside him. He imagined walking through the front door, seeing Laura's smile, hearing her voice, feeling the warmth of familiarity, and yet knowing that even the smallest revelation could shatter it all. The engine hummed steadily beneath him, a constant. In a world that suddenly felt unpredictable, he tried to focus on the rhythm, the sound of the tires against the pavement, the passing of streetlights, trying to anchor himself while his mind swirled with possibilities. He remembered quiet moments from their marriage, shared mornings, laughter over burnt toast, late-night talks about dreams and fears. Those memories now felt bittersweet, precious fragments he feared he might lose. Daniel's pulse quickened. As he reached the familiar curve near the bridge, a spot that had always felt like the threshold between the day and the quiet of home. He slowed slightly, his eyes catching the reflection of headlights on the wet pavement, shadows twisting and stretching in ways that seemed almost alive. Every instinct in his body screamed for caution, for awareness, for answers, yet he could not stop the car. Forward motion was the only escape from the building tension in his chest. He thought again about Laura, about the warmth she usually brought, the steadiness of her presence, and how quickly that sense of certainty had become fragile. The realization was sharp, like cold metal against his skin. Life could shift in moments, small things unseen until they exploded quietly in the heart. He imagined the conversation that might come, the words spoken carefully or not at all, the unspoken truths hovering between them like fragile glass. The headlights of passing cars reflected in the rearview mirror, each one a reminder of the outside world moving forward, indifferent to the turmoil gathering inside his mind. He wondered if any of their neighbors, any passerby, could ever understand the weight of such a moment, the quiet dread of realizing that life might never feel the same again. He thought of the small routines he had taken for granted. Laura's laugh, the shared glances, the comfort of knowing someone truly saw him. Now that certainty felt shaky, almost foreign. Daniel's thoughts raced faster, imagining scenarios. Outcomes, confessions, excuses, regrets, and heartbreak. Every possibility seemed plausible. Every one of them left a hollow ache in his chest. He gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, as if holding on could anchor him to the old version of his life before the unknown seeped in. The bridge ahead loomed, stretching across the quiet river, reflections of city lights dancing on the water. Daniel slowed, almost instinctively, as if the act of driving more cautiously could delay the inevitable. But he knew better. The inevitable was approaching, silent yet unstoppable, carried by a single message, a single moment, a single flicker of realization. His phone vibrated again briefly, lying beside him, a silent instrument of change. Daniel didn't glance at it this time. He didn't need to. The warning had been clear. Everything familiar had shifted, even if only in his perception. The road beneath him felt longer, darker, heavier, yet he moved forward, compelled by the need to reach home, to confront, to understand, to face the truth lurking just beyond the familiar doorway. Every red light, every passing street, every flicker of shadow heightened his awareness, made the ride feel like an unending journey toward an unknown destination. Skyabo. Daniel stepped into the house, and everything seemed the same on the surface. The familiar hum of the refrigerator, the soft glow of the living room lamps, the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingering faintly from the morning, all of it greeted him like nothing had changed. Yet, inside, a storm was quietly building. Laura was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked under her phone in hand, pretending to scroll while her eyes flicked toward him more often than she admitted. Her smile was polite, almost habitual, a reflexive mask of warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she shifted slightly every time he glanced in her direction. The air between them felt heavier than it had in years, laden with unspoken words and invisible walls. He set his keys down on the counter, trying to act casual to ignore the racing in his chest. But every small sound, the clink of the keys, the faint creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind outside felt amplified, like it was reminding him of the fragility of what he had once taken for granted. He tried to start a conversation as if nothing had happened, asking about her day, commenting on the weather, making small jokes. But her responses were short, clipped, polite, yet distant. Daniel sensed the walls had begun to form, not with anger, but with a quiet withdrawal he couldn't ignore. Every laugh she gave was slightly delayed, every glance slightly distracted, and every word carefully measured. The easy rhythm they had shared for years had been replaced by hesitations, pauses, and glances away, all small, yet impossible to overlook. He tried to remind himself that people could be tired, stressed, or preoccupied. He wanted to believe it was nothing, that he was imagining things. But instinct refused to let him ignore the truth that something fundamental had shifted. Dinner passed quietly. Daniel noticed her fork tremble slightly as she lifted it to her mouth, noticed the way her eyes darted to her phone as if expecting something he was not meant to see. He watched her, analyzing every motion, every hesitation, and each small detail, added weight to the gnawing feeling growing inside him. They talked about ordinary things, work, errands, plans for the weekend, but the rhythm of the conversation was off. Where there had once been easy laughter and shared jokes, there was now a quiet politeness, a measured dance around an invisible topic neither was ready to confront. Daniel's mind raced, trying to piece together clues to understand what had changed so suddenly, to make sense of the subtle signs he had missed for weeks. He thought about the mornings when Laura had seemed distracted, the evenings when she lingered on her phone longer than usual, the small moments of hesitation in her voice that he had dismissed as tiredness or stress. Now, looking at her across the table, he realized those small moments had been pieces of a puzzle he hadn't wanted to see. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Daniel sat opposite Laura, trying to engage in a casual conversation, attempting to bridge the distance that had crept between them. She responded politely, answered questions, asked a few of her own, but something essential was missing. The ease, the intimacy, the unspoken understanding that had been the foundation of their marriage was no longer there. He wanted to reach out to touch her hand to reconnect, but an invisible barrier kept them apart. The thought of confronting her directly both terrified and compelled him. He wanted answers, clarity, honesty, yet he feared what he might hear, feared that the simple act of asking could shatter the fragile balance that remained. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock, a metronome marking the moments that seemed to stretch endlessly between them. Daniel's thoughts spiraled, imagining all possibilities. Rehearsing the conversation he had not yet dared to start, the words forming in his mind in endless variations. Laura shifted in her seat, glancing at him with something almost like guilt, but quickly masked by neutrality. He noticed how her eyes avoided his gaze for just a moment longer than before, and that small hesitation made his chest tighten. He remembered the morning, her laughter as they shared coffee, the warmth of her presence that he had taken for granted. And now it felt like something fragile, something he could lose with a single misstep. He wanted to believe this was temporary, a passing stress, a momentary lapse, but the quiet tension between them suggested something deeper. He thought about trust, about the years they had spent together, about promises made in love and confidence. And yet he also realized that trust was delicate. And even small cracks, left unnoticed, could grow into fractures capable of changing everything. Daniel watched her closely, taking in every subtle movement, every careful word. He noticed her fingers brushing her hair repeatedly, the slight downward curve of her lips when she smiled, the way her eyes flickered toward her phone, almost as if she expected it to hold the answer to something he wasn't privy to. Each small detail added to the growing unease in his chest. He tried to speak, to bridge the silence, but the words that formed in his mind stuck, tangled with fear and uncertainty. He wanted to ask directly, to demand honesty, but he hesitated, afraid that the act of speaking could irreversibly alter the fragile peace that remained. The minutes stretched into a quiet eternity, each second amplifying the tension. Daniel's heart pounded, a relentless rhythm that echoed in his ears as he considered the implications of what might be hidden beneath the surface. He tried to remind himself of the love they shared, the laughter, the shared history, the deep connection that had once felt unbreakable. But the present reminded him with subtle insistence that love alone did not erase suspicion, that history did not guarantee fidelity, that smiles could mask distance. Laura shifted again, her eyes meeting his briefly, then glancing away. There was something in that fleeting contact, a recognition perhaps that acknowledged the tension but avoided the confrontation. Daniel felt the weight of unspoken words pressing on him, a burden he could no longer carry lightly. He thought back over months, recalling small anomalies, inconsistencies that he had ignored or rationalized. The short messages that came to late, the excuses for late nights, the times she seemed emotionally elsewhere. At the time, he had dismissed them as minor, inconsequential. Now, in the quiet of the living room, they accumulated like pieces of evidence, undeniable in their combined weight. He felt a surge of conflicting emotions, love, fear, hurt, longing, all intertwining and creating a knot he could not untangle. He wanted to reach for her, to feel the familiarity of her hand, the warmth of her presence, but the space between them felt more than physical. It was emotional, intangible, and growing with each passing second. Daniel's thoughts raced. What had changed? When had the distance begun? Was it something he had done, something he had missed? The questions multiplied, relentless, echoing in the silent room. Laura finally spoke, her voice calm, soft, deliberate. She asked about his day, her tone neutral, almost rehearsed. Daniel answered carefully, choosing words that seemed safe, neutral, but his mind was elsewhere. Every syllable felt heavy with unspoken implications. He wanted to ask her about her day in detail, to probe gently, to find cracks or signs that might reveal the truth. But fear held him back. The fear of discovering something irreversible. The fear that one question could forever alter the fragile balance. He noticed her posture again, the way she leaned slightly away. The way her gaze flicked toward the window, almost longing for distraction. He realized she might be guarding herself, protecting herself, or hiding something from him. The thought made his stomach twist. The quiet tick of the clock marked moments passing too slowly, each one amplifying the tension between them. Daniel tried to imagine what life might look like if everything he feared was true. He imagined confrontations, tears, explanations, apologies, and the unbearable silence that might follow. He tried to imagine the alternative as well, nothing being wrong. Life continuing as usual, but even that seemed fragile now, as if the possibility of happiness had become uncertain. He remembered small gestures from the past, the mornings when she would make him coffee just the way he liked it. The evenings spent talking about dreams and fears, the shared laughter over silly jokes. Those memories were bittersweet now, reminders of a connection that felt vulnerable and easily broken. Daniel's chest tightened, each beat echoing with anxiety and anticipation. He wondered if Laura felt the same tension, the same awareness of distance, the same fear of confronting what might lie beneath the surface. He considered asking her directly, choosing the right words, timing, tone, but every scenario played out in his mind, each more daunting than the last. The room seemed to shrink around them, each shadow cast by the lamps growing longer, more pronounced, as if emphasizing the separation between them. Daniel's thoughts raced forward and backward in time, tracing the small moments that led here, imagining the moments that might follow. He wanted clarity, he needed honesty, but the weight of potential heartbreak pressed down on him, keeping his lips sealed. The evening passed with quiet exchanges, polite smiles, and careful words. Nothing explosive happened, yet the tension grew quietly, persistently, leaving a hollow ache in Daniel's chest. He realized that trust, once shaken, could linger in silence, creating spaces between two people that were impossible to fill with ordinary conversation. The days after that quiet, tension-filled evening passed in a haze for Daniel. Each morning, he woke with a sense of dread pressing against his chest. A heaviness he couldn't shake, no matter how much he tried to busy himself with work or errands. Laura moved through the house with the same routine, but the ease that had once characterized their lives was gone. Breakfasts were quieter, conversations shorter, and every glance carried a subtle weight, as if the air itself had been changed by something invisible. Daniel watched her, trying to piece together the small fragments of behavior, searching for clues that could explain the unease that had taken root between them. He remembered the first time he had felt it, a subtle shift in her laughter. A delayed smile, a glance that lingered on her phone longer than it had before. At the time, he dismissed it, telling himself he was imagining things, that stress or tiredness explained everything. But now, in these long, quiet days, he realized that those small moments had been warnings, soft cracks in the foundation of the life they had built. The message he had glimpsed on that drive home now echoed in his mind repeatedly. No longer just a brief flicker, but a signal that something had changed, something that demanded acknowledgement. He tried to speak to her casually, to ease the tension, to bring back the rhythm of their ordinary lives, but every attempt felt forced. Words seemed heavier than before, their meaning layered with suspicion and uncertainty. The silences that followed were louder than the words themselves, filling the spaces between them with questions that went unasked, truths that hovered just beyond reach. Daniel wanted to confront her directly, to demand answers, to hear the confession he feared but needed to understand. Yet fear anchored his tongue, a fear of shattering what remained, of breaking the delicate balance of love and familiarity they had once shared. He spent hours replaying conversations in his mind, dissecting phrases, gestures, and tones, trying to find patterns, clues, anything that might reveal the truth. Each discovery, each small detail seemed to confirm what he already suspected. Yet he clung to hope that he might be wrong, that love could survive this invisible storm. Laura moved through her day with quiet precision, performing routines with mechanical grace. She made the bed, prepared meals, cleaned the kitchen. And yet Daniel noticed subtle differences in her movements, small hesitations, fleeting expressions of guilt or anxiety, moments that spoke louder than any words could. He watched her hands, her posture, the tilt of her head, the way she avoided eye contact when she thought he wasn't looking. All of it formed a narrative he didn't want to accept but could not deny. Daniel's mind raced constantly, cataloging every detail, imagining every scenario. He considered confronting her, imagining the words, the tone, the consequences. He feared the answers, feared the silence that might follow, feared the irrevocable change that could come with honesty. And yet, he could not remain in the dark. The uncertainty was a weight that pressed on him with increasing intensity, an invisible burden that made even simple tasks feel monumental. Finally, one evening, after the sun had set and the house was quiet, Daniel decided he could no longer wait. He asked her directly, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "Laura, is there something you need to tell me?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy and deliberate, breaking the fragile routine of polite silence. Laura looked at him, eyes widening briefly, then softening with resignation. She put her hands together in her lap and took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for a long conversation she had known was coming. Her voice was quiet, calm, but filled with emotion, carrying a weight that Daniel felt in his chest with each syllable. "Daniel, it's true. Something I need to tell you. I never wanted it to happen. It wasn't planned. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone, but it did." Daniel listened, his chest tightening, the words sinking into him like stones dropped into deep water. He did not speak, did not interrupt, did not react with anger or tears. He simply listened, absorbing every detail, every nuance, every small explanation that came from her lips. Laura spoke of loneliness, of emotional distance that had quietly grown between them, of small moments where she had felt unseen or unheard. She spoke of connections she had formed elsewhere, connections that had filled a gap she hadn't realized existed until it was too late. She did not attempt to justify her actions. She did not offer excuses. She simply spoke honestly, with a kind of quiet regret that could not be faked, the kind that comes only from knowing you have caused pain to someone you love. Daniel's mind raced through emotions he had not anticipated. Hurt, yes. Anger. Briefly. But more than anything, a deep, aching sadness filled him. The kind that comes not from betrayal alone, but from the realization that the foundation of trust they had built together was now fragile. Yet, even amid the heartbreak, there was clarity. For the first time in weeks, Daniel understood the distance he had felt. The unease, the tension, the quiet changes in her behavior. He understood the signs he had ignored, the moments he had dismissed, the subtle fractures that had grown slowly beneath the surface. And as painful as it was, the truth brought a strange relief. No longer would he be haunted by uncertainty, by doubt, by questions left unanswered. The confrontation, though painful, had cleared the air, revealing the reality they had both been avoiding. Daniel sat quietly, absorbing, processing, feeling the weight of her words settle into the room. Between them, he thought about the years they had shared, the love they had nurtured, the laughter, the shared dreams, the quiet companionship of ordinary days. None of it disappeared, none of it was erased, yet everything felt different. The intimacy they had taken for granted was no longer guaranteed, and the path forward would require honesty, effort, and courage. Laura continued, speaking of her own regret, of the pain she felt knowing she had broken his trust, of the nights spent replaying her choices in her mind, of the longing for forgiveness she knew could not be demanded but only earned. Daniel felt a strange mix of emotions: love, sorrow, longing, fear, and even a cautious hope that they could navigate this storm together. He realized that love was not simple, not perfect, not always easy. It required facing harsh truths, confronting pain, and making choices that were often uncomfortable but necessary. The night stretched on, with words flowing, pauses that spoke volumes, and moments of silence that carried as much meaning as any declaration. Daniel and Laura sat in the quiet living room, two people bound by history, love, and now shared vulnerability. The conversation did not solve everything. It did not erase the hurt. It did not rebuild trust instantly. But it laid the foundation for understanding, for dialogue, for the slow, careful reconstruction of connection. Daniel understood that healing would not be immediate. There would be days of doubt, moments of fear, flashes of hurt that would resurface unexpectedly. Yet he also realized that awareness, honesty, and presence could be the tools to navigate the aftermath. That night, after the conversation ended and Laura had retired to another room, Daniel stepped outside onto the quiet street, the night air cool against his skin. He walked slowly, letting the tension of the day slip from his shoulders, letting the darkness and silence provide space for reflection. He thought about the drive home that had started it all, the small flicker of a message, the subtle warning in his instincts, the unease that had propelled him toward truth. He understood now that life could change in a single moment, that love could be tested, that trust, once broken, required care to rebuild. And yet, as he gazed at the streetlights, the faint glow of the city in the distance, the stars beginning to appear above, he felt a quiet determination. He would face this. He would confront the pain. He would allow the truth to shape their future, whatever that might hold. Daniel returned inside, carrying the awareness that nothing would ever be exactly the same. The house, the routines, the shared laughter, and the quiet companionship all of it was now tinged with the knowledge of vulnerability and the fragility of trust. He understood that some events in life mark a turning point, moments after which things can never return to their previous state, moments that demand introspection, courage, and resilience. Laura was in the kitchen, washing dishes, her movements calm, deliberate, yet tinged with the subtle weight of what had been revealed. Daniel approached her quietly, neither accusing nor pleading, simply present. She glanced at him, eyes meeting his briefly, and in that moment there was a recognition, silent acknowledgement of shared understanding, of mutual responsibility, of the fragile bond that remained. They did not speak for several minutes. Words were unnecessary. The space between them was filled with the gravity of truth, with the acknowledgement of imperfection, with the quiet determination to face reality together. Daniel thought about the drive that had begun it all, the ordinary road that had carried him toward revelation, the simple moments that had revealed complexity beneath the surface. He realized that life was composed of such moments, small, seemingly insignificant incidents that, when combined, could alter perception, shift emotion, and change the course of a relationship. Over the next several hours, Daniel reflected on the nature of love, trust, and human vulnerability. He understood that love was not a guarantee of perfection. No,